Chapter 231, Clash. Part 2. Yuan Liangtua could tolerate it no longer after he had the runs for more than 10 times. He pointed at the tour guide and started shouting, "Is there something wrong with the lunch planned by your tour agency? How else could a Daoyuan class practitioner like me be suffering from such a bad case of diarrhea?" Tour guide Wang was rather maligned. "Everyone ate it and everyone is fine except for you. How could there be a problem with the lunch?" Yuan Liangtua thought again. What is the matter? Why is this happening? Young man, are you all right to continue? Or do you want to get a car back to the city on your own? And auntie was unhappy. "We can't afford to wait for you. We can't have more than 20 people delayed just for you, ain't it? Or, why not go to the hospital?" Tour guide Wang asked. No need. Yuan Liangtua rejected the suggestion directly and started scolding the auntie as he turned back. "What's the matter? Only you paid for this while I didn't? I'll have to go just because you said so? Is this how you speak to elders?" The auntie was furious. "Whose elder are you? Do I even know you?" Yuan Liangtua's face was thunderous and dark. In actual fact, Lu Shu already knew, back on the train, that Yuan Liangtua wasn't a cultured and civilized person. It's impossible for him to think on the account of everyone and the larger picture. If he could really do it, Lu Shu wouldn't have gotten into a conflict with him. And typical aunties would become even more overbearing the more unreasonable someone who stood up to them was. Regardless of being a Daoyuan student or not, the auntie could not stand the attitude of Yuan Liangtua. Before Yuan Liangtua could even speak, an auntie suddenly lied down in the middle of the aisle of the bus. Daoyuan student beat up a person. Ouch, this pain is killing me. Yuan Liangtua? What is this acting for? In the end, only under tour guide Wang's persuasion did everyone calm down. Everyone discussed for a moment. They had just conveniently reached the place where they could marvel at the sight of the flowers of the rape seeds. Everyone took a break for an hour by the roadside, giving Yuan Liangtua an hour to see if his condition improves. If it doesn't improve, he would be sent to a nearby hospital while the rest continued with their tour. Honestly, tour guide Wang was extremely worried about Yuan Liangtua's condition as he might even sue him sometime later. On the other hand, Lu Shu was not very opinionated. He was out for some fun anyway. The bulk of the time on a tour group will be spent sleeping on the bus, alighting and going to toilets. There wasn't much time allocated to admiring the scenery. Now that the bus had stopped, he could bring Lu Xiaoyu around to explore. Upon alighting, Lu Shu found that Li Dian was standing at the roadside quietly, staring at the direction where Yuan Liangtua had left for the toilet. He remained this way, gazing, staring and looking till the dust settled on him like a motionless statue. Lu Shu had thought too far. To be very honest, this man was overly vicious. Yuan Liangtua's state of diarrhea was no ordinary pain. At this moment, the road between the fields in Qingzhou was like a place that led directly to the horizon and the blue sky, as if it was a heavenly path to the sky. The rapeseed fields were vast and broad, like an ocean of crisp green and yellow, relaxing and comfortable. Every time the gentle breeze blew, subtle waves would surge across the rapeseed field, extraordinarily moving. Aunties were taking pictures manically while Wang Shuli and her company were troubling bus captain Zhang to open up the luggage storage department, in order to retrieve their ukuleles and instruments from their respective luggage. The 3 females sat on their respective pieces of luggage. Wang Shuli carried her small ukulele while the other 2 were blowing at their harmonicas. Even though their schedule was delayed, not a tinge of anger could be seen from them. Conversely, it seemed like they really enjoyed this short period of rest and relaxation. Lu Shu held on to Lu Xiaoyu and looked on quietly from not too far away. For most of his life, he had toiled hard for survival and had very little time to relax and appreciate life. There was never a time when Lu Shu could actually relax. As the head of his household, he had to think about them and their future every day. At this moment, Wang Shuli and her company just finished singing Childhood, a song by Luo Dayo. Wang Shuli waved at Lu Shu. Little Shu, come over. I'll introduce you to these Daoyuan students. Didn't you want to be part of Daoyuan class? Maybe they could convey some tips to you. Yuan Li and the rest originally surrounded Wang Shuli and her friends. They noticed that Wang Shuli had quite a huge presence and confidence, as normal students would usually be subconsciously afraid of Daoyuan students like them. But Wang Shuli was evidently different. But at the moment they heard Wang Shuli's words, they turned around intuitively to look at who she was talking to. They tensed up and felt weird the moment they saw Lu Shu's figure clearly. Sister, are you kidding us? Us? Impart tips to him? We are wondering if he could impart the mysterious Tao chapter to us. Of course, this was just their wishful thinking. Firstly, the Heavenly Network was extremely strict in the regulation of training methods, and the imparting of skills required specific training methods. Purely learning the mysterious Tao chapter could not gain them skills. Secondly, there was a conflict between them and awkwardness was in the air now. They didn't dare to open their mouths. Students were just like that. Their pride was more important than anything else. At the very least, it was more important than their training. But in actual fact, the other couple was not very pleased with Yuan Liangtua. They already knew that it was logical for them to give up their seats on the train to its rightful owner. It was basic courtesy. And just because of that incident, they lost the opportunity to befriend and interact with the prodigy of Tiere aptitude. Wherever there were Daoyuan students, it was a norm for prodigies of Tiere aptitude to become leaders within the Heavenly Network. Some cities didn't even have a single Tiere prodigy. How many could there be in the entire Heavenly Network in future? What if that guy became their superior if they worked for the Heavenly Network in future? This was not impossible. Previously, they were still boasting to Wang Shuli about how strong and powerful they were as Daoyuan students. Now that someone stronger than them was encountered, they shut up immediately. How could we have the right to teach them? Yuan Li said sourly. He's a prodigy. Wang Shuli was confused. She didn't see them interact at all throughout this trip. Why did she sound like there was some animosity between them? Yuan Li's words lingered in Wang Shuli's ears. Being clueless about the situation, Yuan Li's words sounded like a sarcastic remark. Lu Shu held Lu Xiaoyu's hand and walked over with a smile. You don't have to worry about me. Oh, Wang Shuli nodded her head and turned to smile at Yuan Li. Then we'll chat with Lu Shu and his sister first. You guys probably need to train, we won't delay your time any longer then. Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu was a decent pair of siblings in her impression. So, sensing some animosity between the two parties, she immediately sided with Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu without any hesitation. Chapter 232, Lone Journey, Part 3. Since Wang Shuli wanted them to leave, Yuan Li and company had no reason to stay and left unwillingly. In the past, they would have lost their temper. But their impressions of Lu Shu was that of a Class D expert, and 4 beginner Class ES may not be able to beat him. The reason was simple. In the Heavenly Network, Class D and above practitioners were imparted the true art of Tao. They were also given swords to be kept within their body as a training for creating their own soul sword. Furthermore, they all carried 2 magic spells along. If Lu Shu was to fight them seriously, they would definitely lose. Previously, Lu Shu asked Old Man Li about the average quality of the swords distributed by the Heavenly Network. Wouldn't using these average swords for the training of the soul sword result in a normal soul sword? The old man explained, this is solely for the initial creation. After the general shape of the sword is created, other qualities can be added and the sword can be further refined. The old man's training method revolved around manifesting one's will into the form of a sword. On the other hand, the Heavenly Network's method was similar to sword eating. After eating one sword to create the basic form, other things could then be eaten to achieve a continuous progress. The old man was rather solemn when explaining this. Shi Xuejin was indeed a genius that could achieve the unthinkable. Lu Shu was still puzzled. How did this person achieve so much when he can't even train? The old man never explained this, as though he didn't understand it himself. Li Xianyi sighed. How do you reckon this training regime was first discovered? How did the first practitioner know that this method would work? Lu Shu didn't understand. The first practitioner did not have any reliable training method. The first practitioner would have to face criticisms from everyone and keep moving forward in such an unfavorable situation. Regardless of storms or rain, he would have to persevere to complete the road of training. Li Xianyi added, Shi Xuejin is extremely talented. The current world emphasizes on aptitude, and it is impossible to succeed without any. But this man has no aptitude and managed to forge an alternative method for those like him. In fact, there are many unthreaded roads waiting to be discovered in this world. Speaking till this point, Li Xianyi paused. Lu Su once said something like this. Lu Shu nodded, but how does he continue on this path? Isn't he unable to train? He wishes to understand all the three teachings and using them to explore the foundation of this world. Shi Xuejin once said that he would make use of what he understood about this world's foundation, Li Xianyi recalled. He sounded very confident when he said this, as if this was how the world should be. But it was a lonely road ahead, Lu Shu pondered. Every time you take a step, the footprints around will become lesser. As you enter the mountains, fields, rivers, snow ridges, and forests, the people traveling with you will start to decrease until you're all alone. Looking back, there might not be many co-travelers, but many followers. When humankind took its first step onto the moon, when Armstrong first stepped onto the moon, no one else had ever done it. Lu Shu suddenly felt that Shi Xuejin was like a sharp blade piercing into his mind and an existence he can no longer ignore. Regardless of whether he would succeed, Lu Shu admired his courage. But Lu Shu wasn't destined to do something so brave. His objective was to light up his celestial map. Wang Shuli smiled at Lu Shu. How did your conflict with them happen? Oh, it happened on the train. They were in my bunk playing cards, and I told them to get up, but they refused. Just this stupid thing, Lu Shu replied frankly. Wang Shuli nodded. What's the big deal about Daoyuan class? Does it mean they can occupy other people's space? Lu Shu was rather embarrassed. After all, he was a Daoyuan student himself. But it's all right, Wang Shuli added. Let me ask those Daoyuan students in my school and see if they have any tips for you. Maybe you can enter the Daoyuan class too. To Wang Shuli, Lu Shu seemed to be interested in joining the Daoyuan class, but was unable to, and so she wanted to help. Lu Shu thought that Wang Shuli was rather generous and there wasn't a need for him to reject her good intentions. After this trip, everyone would go their own ways and probably never meet again. So why treat it so seriously? Although Lu Shu didn't need tips to enter Daoyuan class since he was already in it, it was impossible to explain himself at this point. Speaking of which, the Heavenly Network treated aptitudes seriously, and if not for Li Xianyi's help in swapping the test tube, he would still be troubled. Wang Shuli tilted her head over Lu Shu's shoulders as her hair brushed past his ear. Lu Shu, do you know how to sing? I don't. Lu Shu shook his head. He knows, Lu Xiaoyu insisted. I heard him singing Twinkle Stars. Lu Shu was shocked. Is the sound insulation of the walls at home so poor? Lu Shu rebutted. I never. You must have heard wrong. Lu Xiaoyu laughed sarcastically. She had questioned Lu Shu many times regarding this, but he never admitted. At this moment, Yuan Liangtua walked out of the rapeseed field while holding up his pants and bumped into Li Dian. Yuan Liangtua was taken aback and checked the direction Li Dian was facing. Wasn't that the place where I took a dump? Could this scum be following me? F***ck. Yuan Liangtua's felt shivers down his spine. Li Dian was being cautious of Yuan Liangtua using his head-twisting gourd, but he never did. In fact, Lu Shu had planned to use it, but going to the rapeseed field would be too obvious. Li Dian smiled. Seems like you're planning to reconcile. Yuan Liangtua was puzzled. This scum was totally harassing him and now saying something that didn't make sense. He scolded, reconcile my *SS. From Yuan Liangtua's distress, plus 299. From Li Dian's distress, plus 499. Chapter 233 The Meat-Eating Squirrel, Part 1. The first station was Kumbum Monastery, and the itinerary of the afternoon was to pass through the scenic area of the Sun Moon Hill and arrive at Qinghai Lake eventually. It was important to catch the sunset at Qinghai Lake according to the planned itinerary, which was why tour guide Wang said they would wait for Yuan Liangtua for 1 hour at the most. Otherwise, they wouldn't make it for the sunset. Yuan Liangtua, as a practitioner, was physically strong. Even though Li Dian's laxatives were very strong, Yuan Liangtua eventually recovered, albeit being much weaker. Throughout the remaining bus ride, he leaned on his girlfriend, Yuan Li, to rest. A hint of a grin appeared on Li Dian's mouth. This was merely a small punishment. A refund was definitely out of the question. The magical energy of the magical stones was already absorbed into his body. The originally shimmering magical stones were now useless stones. In actual fact, Lu Shu couldn't make out where this man's confidence stemmed from. As the bus arrived at the Sun Moon Mountain, it didn't slow down. Tour guide Wang said with his microphone in hand, because we have limited time to make it for the sunset, we wouldn't be stopping for the scenery at Sun Moon Mountain today. We'll pass by here again when we make the return trip, where I'll bring everyone along to see this place. I'll give you guys a brief introduction on it first. The origin of the name Sun Moon Mountain is related to Princess Wansheng. Legend has it that when Princess Wansheng took the initiative to go to Hefan in the west, the Tang Emperor, being extremely depressed, bestowed her with a precious mirror. He wanted her to look at it when she reached the border of Han and the Tibetans. From the mirror, she would be able to see her hometown, parents, and relatives. After a long time, she reached Chiliang, and being homesick, the princess retrieved the mirror to look at it. The only thing which appeared on the mirror was her skinny, fatigued face in the Chiliang hills under the sun. Only then did she understand that her parents were doing everything for her. In her grief, she threw the mirror, which shattered into 2 parts, each landing on a side of the mountain. This was how the Sun Moon Mountain got its name. Tour guide Wang then cracked a joke. Actually, everyone understands. How could an ordinary mirror show relatives and parents from far away? So this is but a myth. And the bronze mirrors in the past weren't that fragile to be so easily broken. And even if they did break, they wouldn't fall 2 mountains apart. Lu Xiaoyu turned towards Lu Shu suddenly upon hearing the words of the tour guide. You said you were going to give me a mirror last Christmas, but I've still not received it. I even forgot about it. Lu Shu froze. Kiki, I'll buy it for you when we get back. Would you have forgotten if I didn't mention it? Don't be so smug about it. To arrive at Qinghai Lake, one had to pass through 109 National Road here at the Sun Moon Mountain. Only after another hour upon passing through here would they arrive at Qinghai Lake. They would have to spend the night at Qinghai Lake after watching the sunset, as they were scheduled to watch the sunrise early the next morning as well. The accommodation arranged by the travel agency tonight was made up of tents next to Huanhu Road. There were single, double and triple rooms. There were even quadruple rooms suitable for families. They only understood what it meant by a prosperous tourism season when they reached Qinghai Lake. A small and simple public toilet had bright red words written on it, no urination or defecation at undesignated areas. Offenders will be fined $50. And outside this toilet was a queue which was already extending more than tens of meters. When they arrived at the shore of Qinghai Lake, there were already more than 100 pitched tents. Many people were weaving around amongst the tents, and it looked extremely bustling. Apart from tourists, there were locals selling food and drinks. It seemed like everyone was used to the huge surge in tourists who came to watch the sunrise and sunset during this time of the year. The meals prepared were for 10 people per table. There was quite a small variety, but the portions were huge. There was Chinese cabbage, buns, mutton, grilled beef, all of which were hard to come by when following a tour group. Lu Shu, Lu Xiaoyu, and Little Fury were each holding a lamb chop. Wang Shuli laughed at that sight. Your pet squirrel eats meat? Little Fury shot her a look. What's the big deal over eating meat? I can still read and write, would you believe it? From Little Fury's distress, +1 +1 +1. 10 people to a table meant that the tour group had to be split into 2 tables, and Yuan Liangtua and his company were at a loss. On one hand was the group of 6 including Wang Shuli and Lu Shu, while on the other was uncles and aunties. The conflict from that afternoon was still fresh in everyone's heads. These uncles and aunties definitely cast a negative shadow over the younger generation. Take Luo Chung for example. The basketball courts and etc. were usually taken up by seniors. The younger generation had to risk being scolded if they wanted to play ball. But honestly, Lu Shu couldn't get used to such behavior. There were too many seniors who didn't know respect. On one table, the aunties had moved the better dishes in front of them while the vegetables were left on the other side. Seeing that, Yuan Liangtua was troubled and simply went over to Lu Shu's table to sit with them. But it was not relaxing to sit here as well. Facing someone as powerful as Lu Shu, especially since they had gotten into a conflict with him previously, they were evidently in a debacle. Only when they realized that Lu Shu was acting as if he didn't know them at all did they relax a little. They could just treat each other as strangers, to save themselves from some awkwardness. Wang Shuli scanned both parties with her eyes. In the tense atmosphere, it was obvious that the Daoyuan students were more powerful and superior, but why did it seem as if these 4 Daoyuan students were harboring some sort of fear towards Lu Shu? She couldn't verify if her instincts were correct. Previously, she was still thinking that she would help Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu if the other party wanted trouble with them. But now it seemed like she had worried too much. Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu looked at ease, without the slightest hint of worry. In contrast, Yuan Liangtua and his friends looked rather troubled. Wang Shuli was not an idiot. Although she did not know the reason, she would definitely catch on to some clues as to what was amiss. She had many guesses but could verify none of them because Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu never exhibited any abnormality. But this was nothing. Even if the siblings didn't have any special identity, she was willing to befriend them as long as she thought that they were decent people. For some reason, Wang Shuli always felt that Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu exuded a unique quality, which was very attractive. Li Dian sat alone at that table with the auntie, looking at the vegetables in front of him. He was rather upset as the vegetables looked pathetic. He had been through the storms of society for years, and one thing he learned was, never go against an auntie head-to-head. They really can't be messed around with. At this moment, his eyes lit up when he saw Little Fury next to Lu Xiaoyu. Since he was on the path of training, he wanted to have one magical pet to play with. But this sort of encounter can only be changed upon with luck, now that the price of such pets are insanely high on the market and he couldn't afford a single one. Wouldn't it be fantastic if he could coax this pair of siblings into giving him the squirrel? With his compass in his hand, he was extremely certain that this pair of siblings weren't practitioners. This should make things easy. Chapter 234, Heartbroken Wang Shuli, Part 2. Li Dian carried his chair over to Lu Shu's table and mingled with the rest of them. He immediately asked, I've always wanted a pet, is this squirrel of yours for sale? I'm willing to offer a high price. Lu Shu was stunned upon hearing his words. He already had his sights set on Little Fury even when he hasn't dealt with his own mess. He responded indifferently, what's your high price? $20,000. Li Dian replied, you have to know that normal squirrels can't fetch this sort of price. Lu Shu was amused. Brother, you want to buy Little Fury with $20,000, but can you defeat and control it? How about I buy you for $20,000? In fact, Little Fury's abilities had been improving consistently since eating the second refresher fruit. It had easily passed through the novice stage of Class E to the latter stages. Looking at Li Dian, of novice class E ability, he probably could not defeat Little Fury. Lu Shu sighed, this is passed down from ancestors in my family. I really can't sell it. Li Dian was stunned. What passed down from ancestors, who are you kidding? He replied, you won't get such a good opportunity anymore after missing it. It isn't every day that a squirrel could fetch a price of like $20,000. Lu Shu was dumbfounded, is this guy done talking, did you just discover the internet or something? Or do you think that I don't frequent forums on the Golden Foundation? Kiki, Li Dian stayed silent. He actually wanted to test the waters. He had scammed so many people in the past and he had been exposed before. If he didn't have such thick skin, he would never have survived. So he didn't feel that embarrassed even after being exposed by Lu Shu. When everyone was done with dinner, tour guide Wang informed everyone to go to the shore of Qinghai Lake to await the sunset. The sun was already very low at the moment, and it would sink beneath the horizon any moment. The golden rays shone through the cascading clouds far away. The faraway clouds were like thick walls of a city, and those opposite the sun were already shaded with a golden red hue. Everything seemed like a majestic, floating castle. For some reason, every time Lu Shu looked at sunsets, he would feel warm and an unexplainable satisfaction. It was just like the satisfaction of a good meal with no worries about life or anything else. All he had to do was to enjoy the silence and the atmosphere. Lu Shu asked suddenly, Xiaoyu, when do you feel the most blessed every day? Lu Xiaoyu pondered for a moment before replying, having dinner together after buying groceries with you and watching you making dinner. Honestly. Watching you make dinner, then having dinner together. Honestly. Having dinner together. Lu Shu looked into the distance and the corners of his lips curled into a slight smile. Actually, Lu Xiaoyu was the most blessed because the simpler the gauge of bliss, the easier it would be living in bliss. He turned around to see a group of riders coming over at Huanhu Road. There were cyclists as well as people on motorcycles. One of them looked rather familiar, but Lu Shu didn't think too much into it as he was too far away to make the person out clearly. Under normal circumstances, how could he bump into someone familiar so far away from home? He tried to register key features of the person in his head, and if there was a chance to bump into him again, he could know if he actually knew this person. At this moment, Wang Shuli brought her friends over with a few cartons of beer she just bought. Want a drink? Sunsets and beers are the most complementing duo. Lu Shu was rather hesitant as he had never drunk alcohol in his life. On one hand, it was because he didn't have that extra money to drink, and on the other, he didn't have anyone to drink with. Wang Shuli and her friend sat down even before Lu Shu could finish thinking. At this instant, the sun finally sank below the horizon. The entire Qingzhou Lake turned into a golden sea. Being the largest lake in China, there was logic in calling it a sea. The vastness of the sea was soothing and could improve the mood of people. Lu Shu expressed that he didn't drink. After all, there were still things he wanted to do. Honestly, he questioned the reasons for a person like Li Dian being on this tour. He felt as if he had other reasons for embarking on this tour, and it wasn't as simple as going for a holiday after selling his gourd. This sort of person was busy in the underground world all the time, but suddenly he's out on a tour? So, Lu Shu wanted to find out more information about Li Dian tonight. Ultimately, Wang Shuli and her friends didn't mind at all. They could drink to their heart's content while Lu Shu couldn't understand their high as he himself couldn't get high at all. Wang Shuli was drunk and sat near the shore of the lake, her body gently swaying. Her figure, soaked under the light of the beautiful sunset, seemed like the main character from a comic book. Before they got wasted, Lu Shu heard from them that they came out on a holiday to relax only because Wang Shuli dumped her boyfriend and was in a rather poor mood. Everyone else was knocked out and Wang Shuli had a hand on Lu Shu's shoulder. In the end, Lu Xiaoyu took Wang Shuli's hand away from Lu Shu's body in all seriousness. Wang Shuli didn't mind either as she laughed sheepishly. Actually, I don't really care very much about him. I just feel that there's something wrong with people nowadays. Can't we live without doing it before marriage? Didn't people in the past live well? I just don't want to do everything his way, why should I do it? Lu Shu pondered over those two words, isn't this too much information? Wang Shuli, drunk and disoriented, almost fell onto Lu Shu with her body swaying. In the end, Lu Xiaoyu held onto her instead. Wang Shuli pointed at Lu Shu, you tell me. Why? Lu Shu thought, maybe people in the past didn't do it before marriage because they could get married at 13. From Wang Shuli's distress, plus 666. Wang Shuli was rather unhappy. In the past, the pace of life was slow. Everything was slow. Cars, carriages, and mail were slow. A lifetime was enough to only love one person. Lu Shu didn't want to argue on purpose, but he felt that he should speak about the truth from an objective perspective. To be honest, what you're saying about life in the past is just an unrealistic picture of what really happened. Mail could only reach its destination in 3 months, and it might not even reach its destination. People could have a change of heart by then. This sort of thing doesn't change with the times. In fact, there were more unfaithful people in the past compared to now. At that time, it was still legal to have concubines. Wang Shuli was stunned, damn this guy. From Wang Shuli's distress, plus 499. But Lu Shu suddenly said earnestly, in truth, relationships and feelings shouldn't be that sacred. People shouldn't be falling for another person just after chatting for a few days, or they shouldn't feel like they want to spend a lifetime with a person they just dated for a few months. Or wanting to be with someone forever just because he treats you well. It's no doubt that there are so many people filled with hatred or overwhelmed by melancholy. This was the price to pay for being idealistic. One day, everyone would understand that there is no such thing as undying devotion. Wang Shuli looked at the radiating teenager under the sunlight and wondered how much did this teenager had gone through to understand relationships so profoundly. What about you and Xiaoyu? Wang Shuli questioned. Lu Shu thought for a moment before smiling and rubbing Lu Xiaoyu's head, we're different. We're born to depend on each other. Lu Xiaoyu nodded in agreement, and in her heart, she responded, that's right. Chapter 235, That's Unfair. Part 3. Wang Shuli and friends were lying drunk along the shore as the sunset was almost over. The red sunlight refracted through the clouds and shone onto their messy and uncivilized postures. Lu Shu instructed Lu Xiaoyu to look after them as he wanted to go over to Li Dian. Lu Shu also wanted to check out the familiar figure he saw. He remembered the location of Li Dian's tent and slowly approached it amidst the commotion. Lu Shu stood beside the tent and tried to listen to the movements inside. He heard an ongoing conversation. One of the voices belonged to Li Dian while the other voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't recognize it at that moment. Is there a need to be so careful to take cover as tourists? I don't think the Heavenly Network's focus is on the Qingzhou's side. It's better to be safe. Do you know how much I've suffered when I escaped from that place? That's true. How do we approach at night? Li Dian asked. Are you certain that your compass is accurate? I do not wish to waste this trip. You may have achieved Class E, but I would have wasted my time and risked getting found out by the Heavenly Network for nothing. Zhou Ziheng is still waiting for us at the No Man's Land. The team is strong this time and we might accomplish something big. The other voice said. What big thing? I'm quite certain. My compass is rarely wrong and the thing should still be in the Sun Moon Mountain, Li Dian replied. Your standing in this organization is too low. The things you should know will be made known to you, but the things you shouldn't know, you shouldn't ask, the other voice said. We will depart when the sun has set. I rode a motorbike here along with a group of riders. Later on, I would like you to seat on my motorbike and we will reach the Sun Moon Mountain within an hour. We will quickly retrieve the item and head back without getting found out. Also, we shouldn't underestimate the Heavenly Network. You rely on your compass, but there are people in the heavenly network with the natural ability to sense magical energy. These people are known as the sensory type, and who knows how many of them are in that place? Lu Shu was suddenly reminded of a conversation with Li Xianyi. He had been wondering about how Yuan Liangtua and his company's sensitivity to energy waves weren't as strong as his. Did this mean that he himself was a sensory type? And this ability of his was magnified after obtaining the Seal of Lands. But what is this thing inside the Sun Moon Mountain that they're talking about? The other person inside the tent said that he arrived with a group of riders on motorbikes. So could he be the person Lu Shu found familiar? Lu Shu was extremely curious. Who could this person be? The two of them continued chatting for quite a while about the changes in this world which Lu Shu already knew of. In fact, Lu Shu knew more than them, and the things they mentioned were merely speculations while Lu Shu experienced them firsthand. This was one of the greatest disadvantages of training independently, the lack of information. Some people thought of training independently as cool and unrestrained. But in fact, leaning against a large tree was the most cooling. Training independently was tough. Lu Shu was staring at the other party's motorbike, thinking to himself that the other part was going to ride that to find something at the Sun Moon Mountain. So how should he proceed? At this moment, the tent's curtain opened up and Lu Shu walked away discreetly. Glancing back, he realized that the other party was someone he knew. Liang Che. Lu Shu's first encounter with Liang Che was the same day he obtained the celestial map, and the memories of that day were still etched deep inside his heart. Just like every other turning points in life, the details of these important moments would be deeply etched in one's heart. Lu Shu's life had started to change since that day. On that same day, Lu Shu met Liang Che, who was also being chased by the heavenly network. In the afternoon, he even witnessed Liang Che performing in the circus before being taken away. At night, he saw Liang Che escaping for his life. After that many encounters with Liang Che, he could remember clearly how he looked like. No wonder the sense of familiarity, it was him. Seems like this guy was never caught by the heavenly network and even joined some organization made of secret practitioners. Lu Shu felt a strong wave of energy from him, which was strong when they first met. He should be of at least a middle-class D. He must have awakened again. At the same time, seeing Liang Che gave Lu Shu a bad impression of the organization. Li Dian was a cheat and Liang Che tried to extort from him. Both of them weren't anything decent. As the saying went, birds of the same feather flock together. Lu Shu imagined this organization to be filled with people that would use any means to achieve what they wanted. And his feeling was right. Li Dian and Liang Che's motives here were not pure. Taking cover as tourists, their real motive was something inside the Sun Moon Mountain. But, what could be in the Sun Moon Mountain? Lu Shu thought that although that bare place was the main city of ancient Tibet, everyone had passed by it and there weren't anything interesting or any tombs there. Wait. What about the treasure mirror of Princess Wencheng? It can't be. Liang Che stood in front of the tent and whispered, "I'll go grab the motorbike. Meet me on the 109, National Road." Okay, Li Dian replied. Lu Shu suddenly realized the other parties had motorbikes. What about himself? Could they ride motorbikes while he would have to rely on his legs? That's too unfair. Lu Shu wasn't happy. The sun had already set and the light rays were gone. The clouds were slowly disappearing into the horizon. Liang Che was humming a little tune as he walked towards the road, excited at the thought of obtaining a magical item. However, when he was about to arrive at his motorbike parked at the roadside, his jaw-dropped to see a skinny figure escaping with his motorbike. Who the F***CK is that? From Liang Che's distress, plus 999.
What does it mean to be happy? 'cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty, man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens,